This is a true story that took place in January of the pandemic, the middle of the pandemic. Now, my husband Alan and I were trying to be very cautious about interacting with people, so we just stayed home. That was fine during the spring and the summer, but it was winter. In the spring and the summer, I could turn to my garden, and that kept me plenty busy. In the summer, I just had my houseplants for the therapy I needed. So I decided that this particular day, I would divide my out-of-control houseplant, spider plant. So I put it on the table, and I stuck my trowel in, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. It was a tiny little frog. So I introduced myself and found out his name was Pierre. Now, this is January. All the houseplants had been taken inside in October, so he'd been in there for 3 months. The other crazy thing was that plant was never outside at all. So I figured what must have happened was he came in on a poinsettia that I had brought in and then moved to the spider plant. Kind of like when you move to a new town, you might start in one place, and then once you get to know it, you think, oh, I might do better over there. So he made a good choice. The spider plant was really good for him. So I started Googling frogs and determined he was a little tree frog. He was about 1 inch, big as half my thumb. I read a little more about tree frogs and found out that they can jump 25 times their length. And they live for 8 to 10 years. Now, since he was going to be around for a while, and he was quite small, I thought, I better, start making him comfortable. So I got him a little bottle cap for water, and I put that in the spider plant. And then I got a little bigger cap from an orange juice container and gave him that so he could splash around a bit. So I had the water situation under control. So now I started reading a little further, what do tree frogs eat? Well, that was a little more discouraging. It said, tree frogs eat insects. And your choices are mealworms or pin crickets. Buy them at your local pet store. So off I went to the pet store, and I opted for the mealworms because I didn't want crickets jumping all over the house. And I came back. Well, Pierre clearly opted for the crickets because he would have nothing to do with the mealworms. So back to the pet store I went. And the store clerk said, I'm sorry, they're only delivered on Tuesdays and Fridays. And this was Sunday. Well, I figured Pierre must have a source of food. He'd been inside for 3 months now already, so I tried not to worry about it too much. Then the next time Tuesday came around, I went to the pet store to get the crickets. They were delivered as planned, but they had all frozen. So I had to wait till Friday. I go back to the pet store on Friday, and I thought, this could happen more than once, so I better buy a lot of crickets. So I bought a great big plastic bag of crickets, and I came home, and I put them in the refrigerator, as this pet store had suggested. Well, my husband was not that happy about having crickets in the refrigerator, and the crickets weren't that happy either. So back to the pet store I went, and they sold me a lovely little cricket keeper for $20. And it had tubes so the crickets could play in it. I went back home and I Googled, what do crickets eat? Well, crickets eat leafy greens like kale and spinach and lettuce. And I thought, this is going to be easy. That's stuff I eat. I like this. So I got them all set up, and I got another little water bottle cap to give them their water. The next day I woke up and looked in on the crickets, and so many of them had drowned in the water bottle. So I Googled, can pin crickets swim? And the answer was no. So what I had to do was take a spray bottle and spray all the leafy greens every day. So the problem was solved. Well, the weeks went on, and we were pretty accustomed to each other at this point, you know, and Pierre had always been a free-range frog, so I let him stay that way. You know, sometimes you'd see him on the outside of his decorative container. Sometimes you'd see him on a different plant or the windowsill. And one morning, I even saw him hopping from the kitchen back to the dining room and into his spider plant. So, but things went fine, and as long as we watched where we stepped and we knew his whereabouts before we vacuumed, there were no problems. Well, May came, and I thought, I really should let Pierre go back outside. He'd been with us for 8 months at that point, and he'd been safe, like I said, but I wanted to make sure he was going to be safe when I let him out, too. So there was a little stone house in the garden, and I had made it with my granddaughters for the fairies, in case there were any fairies in the garden. And it was vacant, so I put a sold sign on it, and then I gave it to Pierre. And I took Pierre, the spider plant, and the decorative container, and I put them all down by his new little house to acclimate him. A week went by, and I didn't see Pierre, so I took the container and I put it on the porch. Another week went by, still didn't see Pierre, so then I brought the spider plant back in. Well, a few days after that, my husband and I were going on vacation, and I had bought a beautiful hanging fuchsia, and I didn't want it to die while I was gone. So I decided, oh, I'll just put it in this container and water the heck out of it. So I did that, and all of a sudden I heard this sound like, and I thought, it's Pierre. And so I ran down to his house, you know, calling his name, and he wasn't there. And I went back up on the porch, and I thought, I don't know, I know I heard him. And Alan said, yeah, I heard him too. And I heard the sound again, and it was coming from the decorative container. So I lifted up the fuchsia plant, and sure enough, there was Pierre. He had hopped from his new home all the way up to the porch to his old home. So I gave him a little water and said, hey, come back anytime. This is great. Now, I learned a few things from Pierre. I learned that tree frogs can actually like change colors. So when he was on one place, he might be like a light gray. If he was in the dirt, he'd be more brown. And I also learned that although tree frogs live in trees, not all of them do. Some might live in your spider plant in your dining room. Thank you.